The night my son-in-law asked me to leave my work boots by his parents' mudroom door, Ava's rescue inhaler was already sitting on the porch rail in the rain. That little blue tube should never have been there. It should have been in the side pocket of her unicorn backpack, or in the kitchen junk drawer Lydia keeps for emergencies, or clutched in Ava's damp little hand the way she carries it whenever the weather turns mean, not outside, not alone. Rainwater had already gathered in the mouthpiece. "Dad," Lydia said softly through the half-open door, "please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked down at my boots, paint on one lace, plaster dust in the seams, the honest dirt of a man who still fixes what breaks with his own hands, and then back at that inhaler, taking rain, and I understood. I had not been invited to dinner. I had been invited to agree to something. My name is Thomas Vale. I am 68 years old, and I have learned that people reveal themselves fastest in the small moments they think don't count, where they ask you to stand, what they leave in the weather, which child's emergency they stop treating like an emergency. I still live in the same brick house my wife and I bought 33 years ago, the one with the screen door that sighs shut too slowly in summer and the hallway board that clicks after midnight outside the linen closet. I notice houses before I notice people, always have. A changed routine tells the truth before a changed face does. Lately, the truths had been accumulating. My daughter Lydia is 36, hospice nurse, soft hands, steel spine. The kind of woman who can hold a dying stranger's hand for hours and still remember to call her father on the drive home because she knows evenings get louder when you live alone. Her daughter, Ava, is 7. She leaves half-colored worksheets on my coffee table, cereal rings beside the sink, damp socks kicked under chairs, and the occasional glitter disaster in places glitter should never reach. I measure peace by those little residues now. When children stop leaving traces, houses begin to sound too honest. Lydia married Brent Harlow 2 years ago. Brent is the kind of man who makes politeness feel like a locked door. Regional Operations Director at Fleetway Medical Routes. Good posture, measured smile. A voice trained to sound calm in front of frightened people and ambitious men. The sort of man who thinks control is love if he says it gently enough. He believed he climbed into Fleetway through merit, interviews, recruiter calls, and board approval. And for a while, I let him keep that belief. What Brent never understood was that Fleetway's routes, depots, shell ownership, and board voting structure all still flow back to a quiet service company most people mistake for a dead regional brand. Mine. No magazine profiles, no plaques, no foundation dinners. Just paper laid carefully over 21 years, layered the way old men build things when they care more about endurance than applause. I gave Brent that role because Lydia loved him. That is the shameful truth, not strategy, not foresight. Love made me generous in a direction I should have inspected harder. At first, his failures were small enough to explain away. At Fleetway's winter banquet, a dispatcher asked if I was with corporate. Before I could answer, Brent smiled and said Tom mostly helps with Ava's school pickups and handyman stuff. Keeps busy. Keeps busy. A phrase people use when they need your life to fit somewhere smaller than it does. I smiled. Let it pass. I have a bad habit of letting the first wound stay open because I want to see what kind of man keeps pressing on it. A week later, I was dropping off soup at Lydia's place when I heard Brent through the cracked kitchen window. "She still feels responsible for him," he said quietly to someone on speaker. "He's useful with Ava, but he's from that patch and save generation. Men like that don't really understand scale." I stood there with the soup cooling in my hand. For one ugly second, I wanted him to keep going, wanted more ammunition, wanted the clean relief of certainty. That is one of the less noble things about getting older. Sometimes you want the betrayal to finish introducing itself. Instead, I left the soup, knocked twice, and acted like I had heard nothing. Inside, the refrigerator hummed. Ava laughed upstairs. A cartoon theme song bled faintly through the vents. The house was still alive then. That matters. The Sunday dinner invitation came 3 days later. Brent's parents' farmhouse sat 40 minutes outside the city, all reclaimed wood, curated warmth, and money disguised as taste. Denise Harlow used to sell luxury homes. Ron Harlow never stopped selling himself. Lydia said it was just family. Then Brent called separately. That was warning enough. Tom, he said in that office soft voice. One thing, Mom just had the floors redone, so maybe skip the work boots tonight. And maybe wear something a little cleaner. You know how first impressions can be. I looked at the boots by my door, the same pair Ava once called my hero boots, after I crawled under her sink to stop a leak. I said, of course. Then I opened my closet, looked past the wool suits, and chose my oldest clean flannel. That was my petty satisfaction. When a man wants to test whether your respect is conditional, sometimes the only honest answer is to hand him the condition. By 6:30, the rain had turned the road slick and silver. I drove out in the old white Fleetway service van. Brent had walked past dozens of times without once wondering why the original registration still carried my initials on the dash sleeve. That too told me something about him. Curiosity and gratitude tend to live in the same room. His had neither. When I pulled into the farmhouse drive, porch lights spilled amber over wet boards, and there it was. Ava's unicorn backpack, half zipped, mud on the bottom, one strap torn beside the inhaler. No child in sight. The front door opened before I knocked. Ron leaned in the frame, looked at the van, then at my boots. Well, he said with a dry laugh, service entrances around back. Nobody inside laughed with him. That silence told me Lydia was already uncomfortable. I stepped inside. Denise appeared from the dining room carrying a casserole dish she had probably never touched before tonight. Oh, Thomas, she said brightly. Would you mind leaving those by the mudroom? We've just had the oak redone. Her eyes dropped to the boots, then to the inhaler in my hand, then away. That was the moment the house changed, because right then, from somewhere down the hallway, I heard Ava cough. Not the harmless little throat-clear children do. The deeper one, the scraping one, the sound that turns every adult in the room into their truest self. I straightened slowly, one hand still gripping the wet inhaler. Then Brent stepped into the hall, face composed, voice gentle. She's fine, he said. Come sit down. His eyes moved to Lydia, then to me, then to the dining room. We need to talk about putting Lydia's house into a family trust. I did not move toward the dining room. I moved toward the cough. That is the truth. And even now, I am ashamed it took me half a second to choose. Half a second is a long time when a child cannot breathe right. Brent's hand touched my sleeve. Not forceful, just directional, the kind of touch men like him use when they want control to feel reasonable. Tom, he said softly. She just got worked up running around with the dog. Denise already checked on her. Already checked. I looked at the wet inhaler in my hand. Rainwater still clung to the mouthpiece. A ridiculous, ugly thought crossed my mind first. Good, let them feel scared for 1 minute. I hated myself for it, even as it happened. That was my selfish beat. Not noble, not grandfatherly, just tired anger wearing an old man's face. Then Ava coughed again, deeper this time. Everything inside me went cold. I stepped past Brent without another word and followed the sound down the hallway, past framed family portraits staged too evenly, past a powder blue umbrella dripping into a brass stand, past the smell of rosemary chicken and lemon polish. I always remember the smell before the argument. Ava was in the den, curled into the corner of an oversized cream sofa, knees tucked up, small shoulders hitching with each breath. Her cheeks were pink in the dangerous way, not healthy, and her little hand was pressed flat against her chest. The dog sat beside her, whining low. "Grandpa," she whispered, trying to smile through it. That almost broke me. I knelt, unscrewed the damp mouthpiece cap, wiped it against the inside of my flannel, and for one terrifying second I thought the rain might have ruined it. That was the first real near loss. Not the trust, not the house, a child's airway. I shook it once, twice, prayed the canister was still dry enough, and gave her the inhaler. "One breath, Bug," I said, slow, like blowing on hot soup. She did, then again, and the room waited. The old grandfather clock in the hall clicked. Rain tapped the windows. Somewhere behind me, plates touched wood in the dining room, as if dinner might still matter. Then her shoulders dropped. The air came back. So did mine. I sat there beside her for a full minute longer than necessary, one hand on her back, feeling the rhythm return. This is one of my narrator scars, I suppose. I always remember how the air feels after truth. This room felt wrong, not because Ava had coughed. Children cough. Weather turns. Dogs make them run too hard. No, because the inhaler had been outside. Separated from the child it belonged to. That is not forgetfulness. That is meaning. When I finally stood, Brent was in the doorway with Lydia behind him. Lydia's face had changed. Not fear, recognition. The kind that arrives when a woman begins quietly adding up a year's worth of dismissed instincts. "I thought it was in her backpack," she said. Nobody answered. Denise looked toward the dining room. Denise finally spoke, and her voice was softer than anyone else's in the room, which somehow made it worse. "Lydia, sweetheart, no one is trying to take anything from you," she said. "This is exactly why women with sick children need structure around them. You're exhausted all the time. Brent's just trying to make sure one bad week doesn't become a lifetime problem." She glanced toward the den where Ava had coughed. "Mother shouldn't have to carry all that alone." Ron pretended to adjust his cuff. Silence after people fail to answer a simple question tells the truth faster than confession. I have trusted that all my life. We moved to the dining room anyway. That is the ugly part people don't admit in family stories. Even after the child breathes, the ritual continues. Food still gets served. Napkins still get unfolded. People still perform normal while the room is bleeding underneath. The casserole steamed. The roast sat untouched. Rain streaked the windows in silver lines. And then Ron slid the folder across the oak table. Not leather-bound, not dramatic. A plain gray legal folder with one coffee ring on the corner. That tiny stain is what I remember. Ordinary household residue on top of permanent damage. "We've been discussing the smartest long-term structure," Ron said in the voice of a man who mistakes financial language for moral language. "With Ava's medical needs and the market the way it is, Lydia's house should really be protected inside a Harlow family trust." Lydia went still. Brent leaned back, performing ease. "Purely administrative," he said. Brent reached for his water glass and missed it the first time, fingers knocking lightly against the stem before he steadied his hand. That tiny miss told me fear had reached his hands before it reached his voice. It would make refinancing easier, consolidate liabilities, protect future education planning. He had the whole speech ready. Too ready. I opened the folder. The first page was routine trust language. The second page carried the hook under the skin. Primary controlling trustees, Brent Harlow and Ronald Harlow. Lydia, beneficial resident only. No disposition rights. No unilateral sale authority. No emergency borrowing protection without trustee approval. I read it twice. Then a third line caught me. In the event of custodial instability or medical neglect, temporary guardianship review rights may be petitioned by trustees. That was the midpoint, meaning reversal. The house was never the real target. Ava was. Everything before this moment changed shape. The inhaler outside, the backpack half-zipped, the soft pressure at the porch, the insistence on family dinner. This was not about asset protection. This was about building a paper trail where Brent's family controlled the roof over Lydia's head and had legal footing to question how Ava's care was managed. My stomach turned, and I will confess something ugly. For one quick second, I noticed the valuation schedule before I noticed the guardianship clause. Money before blood. I hated that instinct, but truth matters more than dignity in memoir. I looked up at Brent. He gave me that same office soft smile. Tom, this just keeps everyone safe. There it was. The word men use when they are about to remove someone's freedom. Lydia's voice came out quieter than I expected. You told me this was about tax efficiency. Brent turned to her, still calm. It is, mostly. Brent rubbed both hands down his face so fast it almost looked like anger, but it wasn't. It was fear trying not to become visible. Do you have any idea what one bad pediatric claim does now? He said, voice thinner than before. One missed refill, one weather surge, one hospital escalation, and insurers start circling everything. He looked at Ava's den doorway, then back at the folder. I was trying to build something that couldn't be taken from us the way everything gets taken now. For the first time all night, he did not sound controlling. He sounded tired, cornered, almost honest. Mostly. There are words that end marriages before anyone leaves the room. That was one of them. The refrigerator in the mudroom kicked on with a low hum. Ava coughed once in the den. Not dangerous now, just the tail-end scrape. But the sound hit Lydia like a verdict. She looked at the folder, then at the hallway, then at the empty place on the wall hook where Ava's inhaler bag should have been. Changed routines, changed safety, changed truth. That was when she understood. I folded the document closed, very gently, and said the only honest thing. No one signs anything tonight. Ron's jaw tightened. Brent's calm slipped for the first time all evening. Tom, he said, with respect, this isn't really your decision. I set the gray folder beside Ava's wet inhaler on the table, paper and plastic, property and breath, and I finally let myself look directly at him. No, I said. It became my decision the moment your daughter's medicine was left in the rain so you could talk her mother into fear. The room went silent. Not family silence, courtroom silence. Outside, thunder rolled far off across the fields, and in that sound, I felt the shape of what came next. The driveway, the rain, the moving space between this house and the one Lydia still legally owned. That was where this war would finish. The storm had thickened by the time we stepped onto the front porch. Not hard rain, the slower kind, the kind that gives people time to say the wrong thing. I always remember the air after truth. That night, it felt metallic, wet, and sharp enough to keep. Lydia held Ava against her shoulder, the unicorn backpack hanging from one hand, the torn strap brushing her coat. The little blue inhaler sat zipped safely in the side pocket now, where it should have been all evening. That mattered to me more than the folder. Maybe that is my child's scar. After that night, I stopped checking locks before bed. I started checking inhalers. Brent followed us out into the rain with the gray trust folder tucked under his arm, still trying to keep his voice gentle. Lydia, don't do this in front of Ava. That line told me he still thought optics were the real emergency. Ron stayed in the doorway behind him, big frame filling the warm house light, while Denise hovered just far enough back to preserve the fiction that she had not participated. The driveway shimmered black under the porch lamps. A moving life space, wet gravel, headlights from the road beyond, a neighbor's pickup rolling slowly past at the exact wrong or right moment. Life kept moving around the collapse. That is always where real endings happen. Lydia did not get into my van. Not yet. She stood in the rain. Ava's cheek against her neck, one hand gripping the backpack strap. The other hand clenched around the folder so hard the paper edges bent. "Tell me the truth," she said to Brent. No screaming, no theatrics, just a woman whose nervous system had finally lined up the pattern. Brent exhaled once, and because men like him mistake calm for immunity, he told half the truth. "The trust protects the house from claims, tax exposure, and instability," he said. "With Ava's condition, if something happened to you—" Lydia cut him off. "My condition?" He looked at me then. A mistake. Because he was not speaking to a frightened wife anymore. He was speaking in front of the one man in the rain who knew exactly what paperwork can do when it is written by the wrong hands. And that was when the final near loss arrived. Not legal, emotional. Lydia's voice cracked in a way I had not heard since the week we buried her mother. "You are building a way for your parents to decide whether I'm fit to keep my own daughter." Brent hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The rain ticked against the hood of the van. Ava stirred sleepily. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked twice from a neighboring yard. Tiny, ordinary sounds around a family splitting open. I reached into the inside pocket of my flannel and pulled out my phone. This was the choice I had delayed making for 2 years. My shameful hesitation finally cashing out. I had prepared for Brent's ambition months ago after the banquet slight and the kitchen window call. Quietly, carefully. I had asked Fleetway's legal compliance team to monitor executive device forwarding, client diversion, and off-book route modeling. Not because he was family, because family is where men most often assume they will not be audited. The report had landed yesterday afternoon. I had not opened it. That was my failure. Part of me had not wanted to know before tonight. Part of me still wanted Lydia's marriage to survive the version of him she hoped existed. Now, in the rain, I opened it. The summary was short. Brent had been rerouting Fleetway's pediatric oxygen and asthma refill logistics into a private LLC he had formed with Ron as silent co-manager. Using Fleetway forecasting tools, using protected client relationships, using child respiratory demand spikes during storm weeks as profit leverage. That was the irreversible line. He had monetized the very fear he used tonight. The inhaler in the rain was no accident. It was emotional priming, a staged reminder of fragility before presenting a trust that would let his family question Lydia's stability around Ava's care. The whole evening reframed itself again. This was not just control. This was systems thinking pointed at blood. Lydia stared at the compliance report through the rain, lips parted, but she didn't take it right away. "If this goes public," she said, voice shaking now, "Ava's school sees it. My unit sees it. Everyone sees I married this." For one terrible second, she almost handed the folder back to Brent. Not because she trusted him, because shame is sometimes just fear wearing family clothes. Brent saw it too. He stepped closer, rein on his collar, voice cracking for the first time. "Lyd, let me unwind this quietly. Don't make Ava grow up inside court papers." And there it was, the real final knife. Not law, maternal shame. I handed the phone to Lydia. She read in the rain while Ava slept on her shoulder. Her face did not break. It emptied. That is worse. Brent stepped forward. "Lydia, let me explain." I spoke before she had to hear another rehearsed sentence. "You rerouted pediatric respiratory contracts through a side company while serving as Fleetway operations director. I let the thunder answer behind me. Your access terminated 12 minutes ago." That was the irreversible punishment. I had sent the compliance release the moment we stepped onto the porch. Device lock, credential freeze, board emergency session at dawn, civil fiduciary action prepared, trust petition evidence packet preserved, but the part that mattered most was not corporate. I looked at Ron, then Denise in the doorway, then Brent. The house remains solely in Lydia's name, I said, and after tonight, no Harlow petition touching Ava gets within 10 feet of a courtroom without carrying evidence of deliberate medical manipulation. Community respect was gone. Career was gone. Guardianship path was gone. Place in the family was already leaving his face. Brent stared at me as if he were finally seeing the size of the room he had been standing in all along. "You knew," he said quietly. Rain slid off my brow. The van engine ticked as it cooled. "I knew enough to wait," I said. My mistake was waiting past the first cough. That line will stay with me longer than any legal victory. Lydia opened the van door herself. Ava still sleeping, backpack inside, inhaler checked again. Then once more. That became the scar. Every night since, I check the side pocket of every child bag that enters my house. Even when Ava is laughing, even when the sky is clear, even when no storm is coming. Justice happened. My body still lives on that porch. As I drove them home through the rain, Lydia sat quiet in the passenger seat, one hand resting on Ava's shoe. Halfway to town, she asked the question I had been dreading for months. "Dad, how long have you been protecting me from him?" I kept my eyes on the road, on the red taillights ahead, on the wet lines shimmering under the headlights, on the moving dark between one house and the next. "Not long enough," I said. When we reached her place, the porch light was still on. The little wind chime her mother bought 20 years ago still knocked softly against the frame. The house could breathe again. That is how I measure justice now, not by punishment, by what the house can finally do again. A house always knows who protects the child before the people inside it admit the truth. Later that night, after Lydia carried Ava upstairs, I stayed in the van a while longer, listening to the engine tick and the rain soften into nothing. On the floor by the passenger seat was a folded drawing Ava had left there days ago. A crooked house, 3 stick figures, one dog too large for the page, and one corner of the paper held the start of another drawing she never finished, just the outline of a 4th person at another doorway. I still have not asked her who that was supposed to be. Some nights are complete. Children leave objects behind when they still trust a house to keep them safe. That night, Ava left me a habit instead. Some nights only show you the shape of the next wound.